Well, OJ Simpson, the ex-NFL star turned actor who was acquitted for murder, has died from cancer at the age of 76. He was best known for the sensational trial of the century in 1994 involving the fatal stabbings of his wife and her friend. Just 2 months ago, in what's now believed to be the last public video anyway of him alive, he gave this update on his health.
My health is good. I mean, obviously I'm dealing with some issues, but hey, I think I'm just about over it, and I'll be back on that golf course hopefully in a couple of weeks.
That was 2 months ago. Simpson's family said he died yesterday, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. And here's a look back now at Sky UK's report from 1995, when OJ Simpson was found not guilty of murdering his ex-wife Nicole Brown and friend Ron Goldman.
At his trial, he was accused of slipping back into his house under the cover of darkness. Today, Simpson came home with the world's media watching. Just a few hours before, he'd stood in court facing the prospect of a lifetime in prison.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information.
The family of Ronald Goldman were devastated. Prosecution lawyers Christopher Darden and Marcia Clark were stunned. Johnny Cochran and Simpson hugged each other with delight. After more than a year in jail, OJ Simpson was a free man.
All right, the defendant having been acquitted of both charges, he is ordered transported to an appropriate sheriff's facility and released forthwith.
Then came the reaction, first from the defense.
I just like to say how grateful we are for this verdict, because we think this verdict bespeaks justice. We never wavered in our faith. We were always optimistic.
The prosecution couldn't believe that all their efforts had been in vain.
But I'm not bitter, and I'm not angry. But I'd also like to thank the lawyers on our prosecution team. I am honored to have
Christopher Darden, for once, lost for words. President Clinton watched the verdict in the White House and then issued this statement.
The jury heard the evidence and rendered its verdict. Our system of justice requires respect for their decision. At this moment, our thoughts and prayers should be with the families of the victims of this terrible crime.
Ron Goldman's family hope to win a civil action against Simpson, but that won't cost him his freedom.
I deeply believe that this country lost today. Justice was not served.
And I just looked at OJ when they said the verdict, and I just looked at him, and I'm telling you, I never felt such rage knowing that he murdered my son, and he's getting away with it.
On one side, scenes of anguish, but at the Simpson home, sheer delight as the family celebrated with the lawyers who set OJ free.
Yeah, that report almost 30 years ago now. Joining us live is the legal analyst, Professor Stanley Goldman, who covered the case for media outlets at the time. Stanley, good to have you with us this morning. Yeah, quite a trip down memory lane there. What are your thoughts this morning on his death?
Well, I don't know how many people are going to be shedding tears for him or not. It's an interesting call. You know, my name is the same. The last name is Goldman, just like the victims' families. I have no relation to them. But first time I walked in the courtroom to take a seat, and I sat in the courtroom on numerous occasions, the sheriff looked at my name, looked at my pass, which was a press pass, seated me. Someone tapped me on the shoulder, said, "Hey, are you Stan Goldman?" I said, "Yes." "I'm wondering if you might be related to our family. Our name is Goldman as well." They had sat me next to the Goldman family, thinking I was part of them. And, you know, the woman who broke down crying in tears there, the young woman when the verdict was read, that was his sister. And I remember sitting next to her in the courtroom when a huge autopsy photo of her brother was flashed on the screen, which was about 6 feet wide. And, you know, it broke your heart being with that family during portions of that trial. Their son had been murdered for absolutely no particular reason in a particularly brutal way. And I tried to be as objective as possible during it. And in fact, I'd done some, whenever the defense called and wanted a question asked about law or something, and I answer it for him. But I felt a little bit connected to that trial, more perhaps than I should have been.
There are generations of folks now, Stanley, who wouldn't understand the magnitude of this case. I mean, as we said, you covered it as a legal analyst. So what was it like to be in the centre of that storm?
Well, there'd never been anything like it. You'd probably have to go back to the Lindbergh killing or something to get a trial, or the Manson trial. But those weren't covered on television. People who are too young now to remember don't realize it was just gavel to gavel live coverage on several different networks, national networks, local networks. At night, there were daily evening shows dedicated to covering what happened during the course of the trial. During the weekend, I myself, look, I'm a lowly law professor here in Los Angeles. I spent 8 years in the downtown public defender's office. I tried murder cases in that courtroom. So I was a little bit in demand. But let me just give you an idea. And I'm not making this up. I used to appear on shows, and then they'd get repeated later in the evening, and sometimes they'd be repeated in the middle of the night. So just talking about the number of times I myself appeared on television as a result of the OJ Simpson trials. I'm not exaggerating to say probably about 2,000. That'll give you an idea. I was on TV probably about 2,000 times talking about the OJ Simpson trial. That's how 10 times a day was not unusual for me to be on different channels talking about the trial.
Well, I mean, it made lawyers and witnesses household names. Tell me something, Stanley, that if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, the classic line from it. Were you there then?
Well, it was a disappointment in my life. I had a seat that day. I was there and decided to go to my office because it seemed like a boring day. I'll tell you one thing about the glove, though. The very beginning of the trial, before I had done any commentary, I got a call from one of the lawyers, and I was already a law professor teaching what they call criminal procedure, and my area was searches and seizures. And he asked me if I'd be prepared to consult with him on this motion they were preparing to write to keep this evidence that had been seized from OJ's home out of court, was the defense. They were trying to keep it out. So I worked for a couple of days on this motion, and they filed it, and they lost it by a little bit. And then they asked me if I wanted to stay on the defense team and perhaps do some other work. I said, no, thanks. I'd rather not be OJ's lawyer. But that motion was to suppress the bloody glove and talk about unintended consequences. Had Lance Ito granted the motion on the grounds that the police shouldn't have been on the property to have gotten that glove, OJ would have never tried it on, and the chances of the prosecution having won that case would have been much higher.
Yeah. Just finally here, we've got to wrap up now, but, he was eventually jailed. How much of that do you think was payback, Stanley?
A fair amount. I once said, I think it was on CNN afterwards, that he had been convicted in the only jurisdiction in the country that might have convicted him, and acquitted in the only jurisdiction that might have acquitted him. A downtown Los Angeles jury was about as likely to acquit him as any jury in the country. But the rules in Nevada are very different when it comes to the definition of both kidnapping and robbery. And because of that, he technically qualified for both, was found guilty of both, and given extraordinary, basically 33-year sentence. And he got out on parole after 9 years. That was probably, to a certain degree, some payback, although I doubt if the Goldman family would think it was enough. It was something.
That's true. Stanley Goldman, good to have you with us this morning. Appreciate the look back.